In the year 845, a ship crept through the fog off the coast of Ireland. On board were Norse raiders, hardened men who had crossed cold seas for gold, cattle, and bodies. Among those taken that morning was a young man whose name history has nearly swallowed. We know him today as Meriadoc, but the Vikings who chained him gave him another name, Melkorka. He was perhaps 16. He did not know it yet, but the sea that took him would also, one day, crown him. The Norse world was not the closed, pale, homogeneous society that later centuries imagined it to be. It was a civilization built on movement, on trade routes that stretched from Scandinavia down into the Islamic Caliphate, from the British Isles east to Constantinople and the Caspian Sea. Along those routes moved silk, silver, furs, amber, and enslaved people. The Old Norse word for slave was thrall, and thralls came from everywhere, from Ireland and Scotland, from the Slavic East, from the Frankish kingdoms, and from the coasts of North Africa. Arab geographers of the 9th century wrote with some astonishment about the rust traders they encountered along the Volga, tall, tattooed men selling swords and slaves in the markets of Itil and Baghdad. The buyers were often Arab, the sellers were Norse, the enslaved were whoever the sea had given them. Race, in the modern sense, was not the organizing logic of this world. Power was.
Melkorka was purchased at a slave market in Norway by a man named Höskuld Dalakolsson, a wealthy chieftain in Iceland. The sagas tell us she was beautiful and that she refused to speak. For months she said nothing. Höskuld assumed she was mute. He took her as a concubine. The sagas are plain about this, without apology, and she bore him a son. It was only after the boy was born that Melkorka finally broke her silence, and when she spoke, she did not speak Norse. She spoke Irish. She told her son his grandfather was an Irish king named Myrkirtan. She had not been mute. She had been withholding herself. That son was named Ólafr, and this is where the story accelerates into something that does not fit neatly into the stories we tell about the medieval world. Ólafr was the child of an Irish captive and an Icelandic chieftain. He grew up in Iceland, in a society that ranked people rigidly: chieftain, freeman, thrall. And his birth status was by law ambiguous. His father was powerful. His mother was a slave. The saga literature that preserves his story, the Laxdæla saga, does not hide this. It sits with the contradiction. Because what Ólafr did with that contradiction was extraordinary. He did not disappear into the margins. He walked forward.
Ólafr was given the nickname Peacock, Ólafr the Peacock, because of how he dressed. He wore colors when other men wore gray. He wore silver. He announced himself with his appearance in a society that valued display and understood that visibility was a form of power. His father, perhaps out of guilt, perhaps out of love, perhaps simply because the boy was exceptional, gave him a sword and a ship and a blessing, and Ólafr used them. He sailed first to Norway, to the court of King Haraldr Grafelder, where he claimed noble lineage on his father's side and was received accordingly. Then he sailed further, to Ireland. He went to find his mother's father. He went to claim the other half of what he was. The saga tells us that Ólafr arrived in Ireland and presented himself at the court of Myrkjartan, the Irish king, that he proved who he was, through his mother's stories, through a bracelet she had given him, through the shape of his face, which the king recognized, that Myrkjartan wept, that he offered his grandson a kingdom, offered to name him heir, offered him a life in Ireland as a prince of the Unil. Ólafr refused, not because Ireland meant nothing to him, but because Iceland was already home. He took gifts instead: cattle, an Irish name restored, a connection to his mother's lost world, and he sailed back. He returned to Iceland not as a man who had escaped his origins, but as a man who had gathered them all up and carried them with him.
Back in Iceland, Ólafr the Peacock became one of the most powerful chieftains of his generation. He built a great hall at Hjardarholt. The Laxdæla saga describes it as the finest house in Iceland, painted with scenes from the old myths, with Asgard and the gods carved into the wood. He married well. He negotiated, feasted, arbitrated, and endured.
He raised sons, one of whom, Kjartan, became a tragic hero of the sagas, beautiful and doomed in the way the Norse loved. Olaf outlived him,